I am really glad that you all are here today. I'm hoping that you've enjoyed yourself. I'm also happy you stayed because I thought when people see a presentation with well-being in it, I'm sure they're going to creep out the room. Because most people say, well-being, give me something I can use. I'm trying to build my career, right? So I'm ecstatic that you stayed. Today, the topic of my presentation is well-being as career strategy, and I subtitle it as just exactly how are you going to make it up that hill? And we all know what the hills are. The hills we must climb for career growth, for career advancement, for professional space that we want to occupy. So I think it's good maybe that we start by setting the stage to kind of give you the context of what we're talking about as it relates to women of color. So just a few statistics on women of color in leadership. So only 3.8% of the board seats for Fortune 500 companies are held by women of color. Within those same Fortune 500 companies, you only have about 15.2% of senior level managers represented by women of color. And if we look at the national level across all industries within the US, only 5% of executive or senior level managers are women of color. And it doesn't get any better it gets a little bit better at the mid-level management level, but across all industries, again, within the US, less than 10% are women of color. And for you, the managers in the room, that mid-level management is a really pivotal space that people occupy. Normally, the mid-level managers are people who have climbed from the entry level, have worked their way to this mid-level position, and they're the launch pad to get to the senior level. So the fact that less than 10% of those mid-level managers are women of color is a problem. And so we have white men, of course, also white women, and minority men whose percentages outnumber that of women of color across all of these statistics. But here's the rub, just to give you an idea. If we were to look within race, so we're looking at our male counterparts of the same race or ethnicity, women of color are beating out the men in receipt of bachelor's degrees across all racial and ethnic categories. The story is the same when we look at terminal degrees. It's your PhDs, it's your MDs, your JDs. We are exceeding the level of men of color within our same racial and ethnic category. So I run these social media campaigns sometimes on LinkedIn. And I had this one campaign that I ran called #RealInclusion. And so I'll be kind of intermixing some of these campaigns in the presentation, but I have this one which I thought was kind of fun in that, I'll read it from here. It says, when people say lean in as though that's the full story, I put my hand over my eye like this so I can only see half of the picture too. You know, I think with regards to the lean in rhetoric that predominates, it's yet another example of how women of color were left out of the women's empowerment narrative. It started with feminism. Feminism wasn't initially established to uplift all women. It was directed towards white women. And again, we have this sort of lean in rhetoric, which places the rationale behind our a lack of representation in these categories on the women themselves. So maybe if we buy into that just a little bit, it's only half of a much larger picture. If we only look at education, we're leaning in. If we lean in anymore, we fall on our faces. So it's not about us leaning in more, because to be a woman of color in the US is to understand that you must operate in a system of racism, sexism, and ageism, which impacts women more than men. To be a man who is older is wisdom, is experience. It is not the same for women. So to be a woman of color is to know you have to figure out how to operate in these systems of racism, sexism, and ageism that attempt to thwart you or throw you off balance from your ideal professional state, whatever that is, whatever goal you want to achieve, whatever position you want to have, or money in your bank account. So it's important that I say this. The context of what I'm speaking about today is not to ignore these things. They are powerful and they are real and they have an impact on all of our lives. But the question is, what can we do in spite of these things to achieve the career success that we so desire? And that's the space that I want to kind of float in for a little bit for the next few minutes. So what if I told you that well-being is your secret weapon? It's the gun in the waist belt. It's the knife in the boot. It's the boomerang in the, well, I don't know what you put a boomerang in, but it's that. It is your secret weapon for your career. Now, I contemplated in incorporating this quote from Audre Lorde because she's often used in spaces that discuss topics about women of color and well-being. And I didn't want it to feel trite to you all, but it's so beautiful and eloquently said. Audre Lorde, who was a great writer, scholar, feminist, queer leader in the Black community, she is quoted as saying this at a time when she was battling cancer. And she says that caring for myself is not self-indulgent. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. Anybody have an idea why she called self-care, self-preservation, I can throw in well-being, an act of political warfare? Anybody? Yeah, just jump on that.
As women of color, we're often expected to put the needs of other people above our own because our needs are undervalued. Thus, by putting our own needs in the center, in the focus, it's an act of rebutting that narrative that our needs are less valuable than others. We're putting our values in the focus.
Absolutely. Politics, being political, is about the way the world operates, the systems, the beliefs, the institutions that support it, as well as the stereotypes that uphold those systems. And so this trope of the strong woman of color, while it has served us immensely historically because it had to, it also is the same stereotype or belief system that competes with the space you have to inhabit to really be thoughtful and strategic about your well-being. This space of vulnerability that says, hey, I need some things too. I have needs too. That strong woman of color, that strong Black woman, that strong Latina image that we try to uphold is often in conflict with our ability to pursue our own wellness. So if I'm successful today, at the end of this presentation, you'll understand the current data about women of color and well-being. You'll also make a concrete connection between well-being and career success. And you will also understand the first step in building your own personal sustainable well-being strategy. Does that sound okay to everybody? Okay. All right, let's go. So, well-being and women of color. So it's important that a lot of times when you read things in the magazines, when you hear people talk about well-being, you're not really sure what they mean. So I think it's important we get on the same page or the same kind of common understanding about what is well-being. So I pose a question very broadly to the audience. If one or two people want to comment, how do you define well-being? What is well-being for you? Anybody? Could be a short, okay, go ahead.
I think it's taking care of yourself spiritually, mentally, and physically.
Have you seen my presentation?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
That's great. Anybody else want to add to that? Anybody? So I think we're generally on the same page of what is well-being. For me, well-being, how I define it, is impacted by my studies in social psychology. So it's easier to understand if we start to the right of the arrow, and that well-being is a state. It's a state of being. It's a feeling of enjoying life, of happiness, of being optimistic about your life, of radiance. And what research shows us is that the health of your mind, your body, and your spirit greatly impact your capacity to achieve that state. So when you have diminished, when you suffer from dis-ease in your mind or your body or your spirit, it diminishes your own personal well-being. So that's the concept or definition that I'm using when I talk about well-being. Now, I think before I jump in, it's important that I share with you what qualifies me to talk to you all about well-being. You heard my bio. I have the social psychological background. I'm also a human resources professional. Anybody in HR knows that a lot of what HR is about is managing people or employees who are having well-being issues, who may or may not be aware of it. You are trying to balance that in a corporate space. So I have this academic qualification and I have this professional qualification, but more so than that, I have a personal qualification of my own plight or challenges in managing my well-being. And one example is my journey to get the PhD. I'm what you consider a non-traditional student, meaning I went to school later than most. You know, I pursued my PhD after a previous career iteration in international development. So I worked in the field in sub-Saharan Africa for many years, came back, worked domestically a bit, and then decided to pursue my PhD. So by the time I started my program, I was a grown woman with grown woman responsibilities. And so here I am jumping into the program. I was a mother of 3, but I'm competing a bit with Nancy because we're also a blended family. We now have 4, and here's my spread: 21, 18, 13, and 3. And yes, the 3-year-old runs the house. And she knows it, and that's what's really scary. But at the time, I only had 3. I had her along the way. So I was a mother of 3, a wife of 1. Thank the Lord, I could not manage 2 husbands. I worked full time. You know, when you're a grown woman with grown woman responsibilities, stopping everything just to study and pontificate is just not an option. So I worked full time. I was a full-time PhD student, and I volunteered at my son's school. I was determined at this time that I was pursuing my studies that I was not going to disengage as a parent. So I had all of these different roles that I was balancing and very poor coping mechanisms, which caused me a lot of stress because I'm living up to this strong black woman image, and I didn't want to let go of any of this. The messy room, oh no. The letting things slide, not me. So here I am balancing all of this, and what do I get from my hard work? I felt lethargic all the time. I developed this habit of constantly snacking. I needed to stay awake, not good snacks. I needed the energy jolt, sugary, carbohydrate laden, because just to sit 5 minutes quietly without being stimulated, I would fall asleep. I cycled in and out of low to mild depression. And it wasn't related to that time of the month. It was just this period of sort of cycling in and out of low to mild depression. Some periods of light, you know, from experiences or things that would happen with my family or doing well in my program. But I was pretty much cycling in this sort of depressive state for a really long time. I had body pains and muscle aches. And when I started the program, I was early 30s. I wasn't, you know, I shouldn't have had body pains and muscle aches for simple things like getting up in the morning or reaching for something, but I did. Serious skin breakouts and serious gastrointestinal problems. Saw a naturopathic doctor, I went to a gastroenterologist, and with all these ailments, they couldn't find one direct cause for the problems I was having. There was no direct disease or illness that they could mention that caused these problems. And it's funny, I was experiencing all of this, but it was only 3 years into the program that I woke up one day and said, wow, I feel like crap. And it was only at that point that I realized, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. But otherwise, I was juggling this, juggling the family, and having and feeling this way in my body and not realizing there was a problem. And what I learned in studying social psychology, the roles you have in your life can be stressors. They can cause distress. And that distress in turn impacts your well-being. But one thing I know for sure as a woman of color, I'm not alone in this. For example, Black and Hispanic women consume less fruits and vegetables and get less physical activity than white women. And when I talk about body aspects of well-being, I'm not talking about a BMI number, a number on a scale, or a dress size. It's about your body being able to support the way you want to move, live, and be in the world. And we know that what we consume and moving our bodies help to encourage that for the most part. But overall, we aren't collectively as women of color doing those things. You have Black and Hispanic women who have lower self-reported health across all socioeconomic classes in comparison to white women. Now, self-reported health, the way that works, you ask women on a survey, how would you rate your health? And they give you some choices: poor, fair, good, very good. On average, we are saying that we are not feeling as good in comparison to white women. And here's the rub: money isn't saving us. We're climbing the ladder, we're getting the bigger paycheck, but it's not helping us with our health outcomes, as it does for most groups. What'd you say, honey?
It's more stress.
Yeah, it's probably more stress. It's probably more experience of discrimination. There are a lot of reasons around that, absolutely. But normally, income tracks with greater health for whites in general. More money, the more healthier you are. Money isn't saving us. Black and Hispanic women have high rates of mental health symptoms and often express distress through physical symptoms. So a lot of times you'll see on research that women of color don't reach the clinical threshold for mental health disorders. But if you look at their symptomology, the symptoms, it's high. Like if the threshold is here, we're like right here. And if you're right here with these sort of symptoms, you're feeling bad. You're not having a good quality of life. It's impacting how you feel. And what we do a lot of times is the distress we feel, as you saw in my case, we manifest that through our bodies. We won't think about it or feel it in the mind, it comes out physically. So a lot of times physical problems are actually a function of stress or things you're feeling internally. And here's the rub. Minorities in general, we are less likely to seek out or use mental health services. And there's a myriad of reasons: cultural, stigma, socialization. But we have to start to collectively normalize this caring for our minds through therapists and doctors the same way we care for our bodies. I'm very transparent about my use of therapists throughout my life, my children's use of therapists. The conversation around mental health therapy should be, girl, who is your therapist? Not, girl, you have a therapist?
Right.
You know, that's normally what it is. What, you seeing therapy?
Yeah.
It's a normal adult thing to do in the world, particularly if you are managing stress, particularly if you have a lot going on. It's an opportunity to check in, to weigh in, and have someone to help you sort through the many complexities of life. And more broadly, for women, if you are in a heterosexual relationship, the data on same-sex marriages is not as prevalent. But if you are in a heterosexual partnership or marriage with children, chances are you do more housework, you do more childcare, and you get less sleep than your spouse. So overall, we are not making our well-being an imperative. And I see heads nodding because we all feel it, we live it, it's our reality. We could have very well been the people they surveyed to ask that question. But we are not making our well-being an imperative. And it's not about time either. That's the first pushback people say. If I had time, I would care about my well-being. It's not about time. Think about it. Everyone think of a day this year or last that felt like the busiest day of their life. That day where you felt like if I had one more thing on my to-do list, I would implode. We've all had them. I'll give you a second. Think about the busiest day of your life last year or this year. And some of you probably had to pick and choose. Just choose one day. One particularly stressful day.
Yesterday.
Okay, there you go. Whoop, there it is. Now, hold that in your head over here. Think about someone you love. Someone who, when you think about them, your heart warms. Love, not lust. It won't work. This activity won't work with lust. I need love. So when you think about them, your heart is warm. It can be romantic love. It could be love for a parent, a friend, anybody. Everybody got somebody? Everyone got a situation? Okay. Now, imagine on this busiest day where you thought if you had one more thing you would implode. This person calls and says, help, I need you, it's an emergency. Raise your hand if you would not have tried to figure out how to help them. You would have said, too bad, so sad. Call your mom and dad, and if you're the mom or dad, just so you say something else, but. And it's okay if you call Tyrone, call somebody, right? Not me. And if that's you, don't no judgment. If you could be strong in that situation and tell them no, raise your hand. The reality is that most of us wouldn't have done that. We would have figured out on the busiest day of our lives how to help someone who we care and we love. So it's not about time. It may be about creative strategizing. It may be about resource allocation, but caring for your well-being is not an issue of time. So why does well-being matter for your career? So I'm going to share some statistics about well-being based on research, and I'm also going to feature prominent women of color and things they have said about well-being. And on this first slide, we have the illustrious, the oh so wonderful former First Lady Michelle Obama. And she says, for me, exercise is more than just physical. It's therapeutic. And I can relate to that. During that period where I was having serious well-being issues as I went to pursue my PhD, I had to step back and I took almost a year off from my program. I was still enrolled, but my productivity went way down. And I was a very productive student. It took me a year to get myself together. And one of the things that I utilized for me, which worked for me, and everyone's well-being strategy is different, is running. I took it up. It helped to clear my mind. Anybody like free drugs? I do. Not the recreational kind. I mean, you might like those too, but I can't publicly condone those. But endorphins. This idea of when you work out, you get these wonderful endorphins that make you feel great for the next 30 minutes to an hour. So I can relate to exercise being therapeutic. But here's the rub. Did you know that if you consume more fruits and vegetables, it makes you happier, more curious, more creative, more engaged, and greater focus? How many of you in this room could utilize that to your benefit for your career? I could. If you commit to regular low to moderate exercise, it also makes you happier. You have sharper, quicker cognitive abilities, and it delays the neurological effects of aging called neurogenesis. As you get older, your brain produces less brain cells. Exercise slows that process down. That's why sometimes you see really active older people who got popping. Their minds are sharp a lot of times through exercise. And it gives you more energy. You're more energetic. So I want to float with this. Let me bring it home. What does this mean for you concretely in your career? If you're happier, it impacts your interpersonal relationships in the office. People want to be around happy people, not the person always complaining, down in the dumps, who always has something negative to say. People want to be around happy people. And a lot of career success is about your networks, who's supporting you, and who's your advocate in professional spaces. If you're more curious, you're more likely to pursue self-directed learning. That's not waiting for the training and development budget to launch, not waiting for your manager to suggest a training, but figuring out how to teach yourself what you need to get where you want to go. If you're more creative, you're more innovative, Lena talked about innovation and the fact that most companies, especially in today's competitive market, want employees who can be innovative. If you're more engaged, you're more motivated, and innovation and motivation work in tandem. Motivation supports innovation. If you're more focused, you're more productive, you get more done in less time because you can sustain focus over time. If you have sharper cognitive abilities, you can do things more quickly, you're more productive, you're more innovative. And if you have more energy, you have a greater and a higher level of productivity. These are all direct benefits of simple things like increasing your fruit and vegetable consumption and committing to some regular form of movement. These are all things that directly impact your career. And some of you may be saying, well, I'm already doing all right. I'm not doing any of this. It's true. But you will never know. Because for example, if you take my case, when I was in my program and dealing with these sort of well-being issues, I was ticking all the boxes. If you looked at me externally, you would have said, she is living life like it's golden. When inside, it was more like pewter or rust. It wasn't golden. Because the reality is, you never know what your A game looks like if you're not tending to your well-being. You never know what you in full wellness can do until you try it. And so whatever you think your good is, it can probably be better. And not necessarily with more effort or more work on your part, but just by giving yourself the benefit of these things like greater focus, more curiosity, and more engagement. So now we move to the mind. The next picture is Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who is fantastic. And she has this quote where she says, I'm not a classic imposter syndrome person because I have that initial insecurity, but I'm capable of stepping outside of it and proving to myself it's wrong. And for me, we talked a lot throughout today's presentations about imposter syndrome, getting to a certain spot, getting to a certain point, and not believing you deserve to be there. We all feel it at one time or another. But what she's saying is, I'm no different than you. I feel these things, but I'm able to interrupt this sort of toxic thinking and challenge myself based on my past experience and my current performance in a situation. So she thinks it, but she doesn't live in it. So when we think about mind wellness, and there are many things I could talk about as it relates to health of the mind, but I'll focus on mood disorders because those are the things that we seem to hear about and or encounter more frequently. That's your depression, your bipolar disorder, your anxiety. Those are all different types of mood disorders, and they can cause things like sadness. They can cause a mercurial disposition where your moods are always like this. Up and down, erratic behavior. These are all potential symptoms of undiagnosed mental health disorders. That's one side, that's the clinical side of the mind. And then you have this sort of toxic self-thought. These sort of soundtracks that I call them, that we say to ourselves about ourselves, the negative things that we say to ourselves about ourselves. It may be conscious, oftentimes it's subconscious. We subconsciously say these sort of negative things to ourselves. And what that does, in social psychology, we have this term called self-efficacy. And that essentially is your belief that you can do what you set out to do. Your belief in your capacity to achieve a goal. So this negative self-talk, it starts to impact your own personal self-efficacy. And then, as if they're like a cocktail duo, you have these self-defeating behaviors that come to play off of that. So you're already not thinking you can achieve it. And so as a result of that, you are having these self-defeating behaviors like procrastination, like self-sabotaging your best efforts. And they sort of work to keep you playing small. Because if you play small, you know you can get it. You know you can achieve it. Versus stretching yourself and playing big. And so the mind, as it relates to your career, if you have sadness all the time, we all get sad sometimes. It's not sadness sometimes, it's persistent sadness and over a 2-week or longer period that you just can't shake no matter what you do. You have less energy and enthusiasm. That impacts your motivation, your productivity, as well as your interpersonal relationships in the office. That mercurial disposition, it can impact your interpersonal relationships, and it's harder to sustain focus as well when you're going up and down in terms of your mood. Erratic behavior has a negative impact on your interpersonal relationships, and it could have reputational effects or reputational impact in terms of how people perceive you without really knowing what's going on with you. Poor self-efficacy impacts your ambition and your willingness to stretch yourself to achieve the things that you want. And then these self-defeating behaviors, they're just a way of sabotaging your best efforts, a way for you to prove to yourself, see, I really couldn't get it, because you really didn't try, or you really didn't support your best efforts. So all of these things impact your capacity to shine, to thrive, to reach whatever your respective career goals might be. And then the last element is your spirit, your soul, whatever you may call it. And the way I think about your spirit or your soul, it's that core self. It's that who you are irrespective of your roles. It's not your identity, because identity gets muddled with how you're socialized, the roles you carry. I'm a mother, I'm a researcher, I'm a volunteer, the groups you identify with. I'm Black, I'm Latina, I'm Chinese. So it's not that, it's that sort of core innate self that we all are born into the world with. It is that soft calling. Sometimes it manifests itself to you, this small soft calling that compels you to do certain things, to move in certain directions you're not even sure why. It's that sort of innate self. And because of the spirit's connection to source, whatever your source may be, God, Allah, Buddha, the universe, it's also your conduit for this sort of intuitive guidance and knowledge. That's what the spirit self is. And what does the spirit want? It wants to be authentic. It wants to live authentically. It wants a space to be able to do that. And when it can't, it actually causes distress that can impact your physical and mental health. Sometimes a lot of the dissettling feelings that we have is about that spirit self trying to break through and move in the direction that it needs us to go. So this lack of attention to the spirit, it causes you to move further away from your own light. And what am I calling light here? You're moving away from your own innate talents, abilities, your center of joy, and your own personal fulfillment. Because remember, well-being is this sort of happiness and radiance and optimism about your life. But when that spirit self can't live authentically, it's hard to feel those things. And not only is it hard to feel those things, but it can result in physical and mental distress. So tending to that spirit is just as important as tending to the mind and the body. So how can you develop a sustainable well-being strategy? That's the big question. Remember, it's not about time. Remember that person who called you, who you love, you were going to help them out. So it's not about time, despite the fact that on that day you didn't have a lot of time. Step one is to decide that you're worthy. I do this other workshop called Self-Care and Strategic Practice. And I'm kind of giving away the punchline of it, but the core of it is kind of addressing the fact of how we often move into self-care and well-being activities without thinking about the foundation we are establishing them on. So we can start it, but we can't sustain it. In order to sustain a well-being practice, you have to decide that you are worthy. And I know it sounds icky to think about your own self-worth or feeling that you're not worthy. The knee-jerk response is, of course I'm worthy. But I ask you to challenge your belief about that with how you treat yourself, how you respond to yourself, how you love yourself in very active, tangible ways. And then evaluate your own personal beliefs about your self-worthiness. To be as worthy as the person who called you on that busy day and needed you when you didn't have enough time. That kind of worthiness. That active, creative, strategic worthiness that we do for others all the time. We figure out a way out of no way for others all the time. The same kind of worthiness we invest in others to invest in ourselves. That level of worthiness. That is how you build a sustainable well-being strategy. And what the actual acts or activities look like is different for everyone. But I do believe that our minds and our bodies and our spirits knows what it needs if we're willing to listen. So a few other suggestions, kind of in that same vein. Another social media campaign was #WellbeingFirst. And this one says, wait, check in with yourself. You are your best defense to maintaining your well-being. And you are. Connecting with what your mind, what your body and spirit is telling you, because it knows what it needs. If we're willing to listen and to trust it, it knows what it needs to be well in this world. And so a very integral part of my well-being strategy is that I do practice meditation. And I follow this lady by the name of Sarah Blondin. I don't know if anyone does meditation or follows her, but she does a lot of guided meditations, which are really helpful in kind of thinking about how we feel about ourselves and others. And there's one particular activity in one meditation that I would like to maybe do here today really quickly that may be helpful with this idea of getting more comfortable with checking in with yourself. So if everyone can kind of put their feet flat on the floor and kind of turn, maybe facing however you feel comfortable, put your feet flat on the floor. And then I want you to put your left hand over your heart and then cover it with your right hand. All right? And then just close your eyes for a little bit. And take a deep breath in, deep breath out. Deep breath in, exhale. Deep breath in, exhale. Now I want you to repeat after me in your head, eyes still closed. I want you to repeat these statements that I'm about to say in reference to yourself. I love you. And I'm listening. I love you. And I'm listening. I love you. And I'm listening. Take a deep breath in. Exhale. And open your eyes when you feel comfortable. How does that feel for people in the room? How often do we do that? Huh? Yeah, probably. And it's true, right? And the idea isn't necessarily that in that exercise all the answers come swimming in, but you're creating a pathway, a conduit to listen to yourself, to open yourself up to the prospect that you can listen to yourself and receive the guidance that you need for your life. And then it's from there that you do it periodically without having to do a formal exercise or activity. So check in with yourself. Your mind, your body, your spirit knows what it needs, and it can provide you with that guidance. Another suggestion, still under the hashtag #WellbeingFirst that I ran on LinkedIn, was be relentless about your own happiness. We often spend so much time worrying about the happiness of others. Be just as relentless about your own happiness. It matters. Pursue it with the same dogged passion that you do everything else in your life. But be relentless about it. And always choose to walk towards your own light. Your well-being depends on it. Some of us will struggle and feel unsettled in our professional situations for a decade or more because we are denying the Spirit what it wants, to move us in the direction that it wants us to. And we often make those choices or compromises for good reasons, financial, family. But there will always be this sort of unsettling feeling until we decide to move closer to our own light. And sometimes that means taking decisions, that means taking chances that are scary, shifting, pivoting when we don't feel we want to or that we're able or capable to do so. And in those situations, I encourage you to leap and believe the net will appear. Take the chance, move in that direction, and believe that the universe will rise up and support you in those efforts, whatever they may be. And lastly, as you sort through your own feelings about your personal self-worth, I'd like to leave you with this: that you deserve all that you desire, personally and professionally. You are worthy, and you deserve all that you desire, both personally and professionally. Not half, not even 3/4, but all of it. Every single thing. You are deserving. And you deserve to have it in full mind, body, and spirit wellness. That is your legacy. Not the strong woman of color legacy, but the woman of well-being. And from that comes the source of her strength and abilities. Because the reality is that we need you on the top of that summit, that hill that I was asking you how you're going to make it over. We need you at the top of that summit, full of energy, charged, and ready to tackle the next hill that inevitably awaits you. Because it's never just one hill to climb, it's multiple. So we need you in full mind and body wellness, able to tackle the hills that wait ahead. And to have the stamina to reach back and pull somebody else up on that summit with you. In doing my work around well-being, it has reshaped how I thought about past professional and academic experiences where I felt there were women of color who could have done more for other women of color. And I'm able now to give the benefit of the doubt and say perhaps what I perceived as a woman who was unwilling to pull someone else up was a woman who was tired, who was on that summit and barely had enough energy to sustain herself, let alone pull someone else up. But in order for us to increase our representation, increase our numbers, and push forward, we need you on the top of that summit in full mind, body wellness. That is the legacy. That is the path. Thank you all for your time. Please, let's keep in touch. I put everything up there except my social security number. You can't have that. But this is an ongoing discussion, an ongoing dialogue. I run workshops, I do training programs, and I just want to support women of color in their efforts. So please keep in touch. My Instagram account is a little unique. It's a way that I manage my own well-being because my family, we consider ourselves to be homesteaders. So we do a lot of gardening and do it yourself kind of stuff in the home. And for me, that's one way I keep my own personal well-being intact. So if there's any way I can be of support to you in your efforts, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.